I want to welcome you to this webinar sponsored by the BYU Management Society. I'm Rixa Oman, the Executive Director of the Management Society. I'll be your moderator for today's event. We're so glad that you can join us. We're very pleased to have Andrea Moss present to us on finding balance. Just a few housekeeping items. The audio portion of the presentation can be heard from the speakers on your computer. You can call in and you can choose that option on the screen panel to the right of your screen. During the presentation, all attendees are muted. In other words, you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. This is in order to deliver a clear presentation to all that attend. You can send me messages using the chat function on the screen on the control panel during the webinar. In addition, many of you asked questions on the survey as you registered. I want you to know that Andrea will try to address a number of those questions. We've reviewed them and read them through, and although she can't address each one, I know they've given her great insight into the challenges each of you are facing. I certainly hope that by hearing of her experiences, you'll find new ways to address your challenges. Again, welcome. Let me introduce our speaker. Prior to joining Comenity Capital Bank as president, Andrea Moss was Executive Vice President of Zions Bank, where she was responsible for bank operations, incentive compensation, and risk management. Prior to Zions Bank, she was President and CEO of American Express Centurion Bank, where she led an organization of 200 plus with assets over 50 billion. Other positions with American Express included Chief Operating Officer, Chief Financial Officer, Controller, and Manager of Financial Administration. She's active in the community. She currently serves on the Board of Trustees of Intermountain Healthcare Central Region, on the Board of Camp Costopolis, and on the National Advisory Council for the BYU Marriott School. She's previously been a board member of the Salt Lake City Chamber of Commerce, the Utah Bankers Association, the ABA Government Relations Council Administrative Committee, Valley West, and the Utah chapter of Alzheimer's Association. In 2011, she was recognized by the American Bankers Association as one of the top 25 most powerful women in finance. Andrea received a bachelor's degree of accounting from Brigham Young University. She's a certified public accountant. She's married to Mike Moss, and they have 5 children. And we really appreciate her taking the time to talk with us today. So with that, let's get started on the webinar. Andrea?
Thank you, Rixa. And hello to everyone. My name is Andrea Moss, and I would definitely, like to start by thanking Rixa for that nice introduction, and especially for inviting me to speak with you today. It's truly an honor and my privilege, and I, looking back on my experiences at BYU, that I treasure so much. I'm so happy to be able to share back just a little of what I've learned on this topic over the past years through my career. This is the first time I've done a webinar, so I'm very excited to be trying out this new technology. I'm sitting comfortably in my office, and I understand we could have quite a large group of women out there listening in, and I guess the best part is that I can't find a reason to be nervous because I can't see you. I can picture you all in a big conference room, but since I can't see you, I'm going to just tune that out and not be nervous. So I'm going to do my best to make this interesting and helpful to all of you. I did receive the questions that Rixa mentioned, and I thank you for that. I was so amazed at your questions and the challenges that you are all facing, and I could relate to so many of them. And I considered those as I've put together this presentation, and I hope to cover many of them during, and again, at the end, I will address some additional themes and some of the topics that you guys have all raised. And Rixa will be watching in the chat room, and if there's something that she would like to break in and make sure that I cover, I welcome her to do that. So with that, the topic today, finding balance. I love this topic. I'm very passionate about this topic, and it's one that I've had the opportunity to speak about a few different times to various women's groups, and certainly in some of the mentoring relationships I've had, it's always a topic that comes up. So I know how important it is to figure this out as women, and I also realize what a personal topic this is. Everyone has different circumstances and challenges, and they have to find their own way that works for them. Finding balance is very personal. So I'm going to share the experiences and some of the things that I've learned in the last 28 years, and really in hopes that you may find some nugget, something that may resonate, that will be useful on your own journey as you find your balance between home, family, church, and career. I remember attending a conference very early in my own career, and I don't remember the speaker, but I know the title was called something such as "Can I Have It All?" It was a life balance seminar, and I don't remember explicitly if the speaker answered that question, but I remember what I took away from it. Her message was yes, but some things have to give, and we have to really define what is all. And that was something I needed to hear at that time early in my career. It had a profound influence on me, and it helped me see things a little bit different and helped me put some things in place to navigate my own balance between a healthy work and personal life. So here I am, hoping to share some of that back with you. If you want to turn the page, I wanted to start with what I call my real introduction. So that was a nice introduction from Rixa, but I really want to give you a flavor of my whole life's priorities and some of the things that I'm balancing to give you insight who I am both in and out of work. That was, Rixa gave my professional resume. This is a little bit more of my personal resume. So I'm the mother of 5 children, their ages. And when you look at those ages, you think, oh, she doesn't have any small children at home, and it must be very different now. And although it's different, I wanted to give you a sense of some of the challenges and the things that are in front of me with my children at this age. I have a daughter leaving on a mission in 3 weeks. I have a son planning a wedding. I have another son, preparing to graduate from college, and he lives in Pennsylvania. I've had a sick child for 3 days at home. And so, regardless of the age, there are demands, and there are different demands at different ages, but I think it's something we can all relate to. I've been married to my high school sweetheart for 30 years. I have my mother who lives with me. She's 88 years old now, and what a blessing to have her with me in my home, but also takes some demands on my time. I'm a sister to 5 siblings, and I have many, many nieces and nephews who I stay in close contact with. I'm a teacher of women in the church, my church organization. I'm a board member, as was mentioned. I'm a president of a bank, and I like to find some personal time to ride bikes, and I'm dabbling in a little bit of weight training, and love to travel when I can. So you can see, as all of you are experiencing, even at this stage in my career, there is a lot on my plate and a lot to balance. So I think we can all share that in common. You want to turn the page, Rixa. As I think about how to start this topic, I may be stating the obvious, but I feel like it's important when you think about work-life balance to think about the work piece first. Just to contemplate it for a little bit and think about where it truly does fit in your priorities. I know for myself, if I didn't really enjoy working, if it wasn't something that I found a lot of fulfillment from, I would have given it up a long time ago. I had plenty of things on my plate, and sometimes there's a necessity for women to work. They don't have a choice. And sometimes there are some choices. And so whatever your reason is for working, I think it's important that you, have to be sure that you find satisfaction and that it is a priority. If you don't want to be at work, or it's something you don't enjoy, I think it's difficult to make all the sacrifices that you'll need to make on both sides to find that balance. So you have to start with the love or the need or the desire to work to take on this challenge. And that's kind of where my story begins, because I didn't have that at the beginning. And I didn't really plan or intend to be in a career 28 years later as president of a bank. So I want to share a little bit of my story. And this is really probably the first 8 years of my career. And there is a point at the end that I think is very important that I learned early that I want to share with you. So bear with me. So as I mentioned, I never planned to have a career. I planned to have an education and I knew that education would serve me, but I didn't intend to make it a lifelong career. I figured I needed to work just long enough to get my husband through college and through law school. I didn't want to rack up a lot of debt, so I felt like this was a good option. So I figured I had about 5 years ahead of me, and then I would be able to stop working and be a full-time stay-at-home mother, which I was very excited to do. That was my plan. So I did finish my education, and I started my career in a public accounting firm. A few years later, I took a job with American Express, and while I was working there, my husband finished law school, and he wanted to move to Idaho, which is where we were both from, and start his career there. So that was the first time I really took stock and said, I'm going to be sad to leave the workplace. I've enjoyed these 5-6 years. I've found a lot of satisfaction in working, but at that time I was still following my plan, and so I had 2 children by then, and even though it had been a bit of a juggle, I was enjoying my career and being a mom. So we moved, and we went back to Idaho, and so I had a short time where I didn't work, and before long I was filling my time with all kinds of extracurricular things, and I thought, I feel just as busy as when I was working. And so before long, I started working part-time, and I thought that was a great period for me. It was through a colleague of mine that was who was a CFO of a company there in Idaho, and I was able to work a few days a week, and that was a great time and worked for me for that period. And then I had the opportunity to go back to American Express. I hadn't really thought about it. They reached out to me and asked if I would be interested, and because when I'd left, I'd always left that door open. So this is where it really required a decision point. This is where it took some soul searching with my husband to decide what was best for the whole family. His career was doing well, but it wasn't exactly what he had hoped. He wanted to specialize, and he wasn't able to do that in a small town in Idaho. So we agreed that this would be best and a good move, and so we did that. So we went, and I was very soon overwhelmed. I had underestimated, getting back into the workforce full time. I had my 3rd child by then, so I had 3 children, and I just really took stock and said, I think we've made a mistake, because I can't balance this. Maybe that's where some of you are feeling you are right now, like just truly overwhelmed. So in talking to my husband, and again with his support, he said, look, we can make changes. We can do it different. You can stop. You don't have, this isn't what we have to do. So I gave notice, and I apologized and said I was going to leave. And then I had my first realization, and this is the realization I want all of you to have, is that you have worth to the company. It's not just you needing a job. The company needs good workers just as much as you need perhaps to work. And so although I expected the consequences of this was for me to leave and to do something different that worked, they were very willing to support me and figure out what could be done so that I didn't have these overwhelming feelings of being unable to balance my home and my career. This was a huge game changer for me. But it helped me realize that sometimes there are other ways to make this work, and they were willing to work with me, and it gave me the courage to trust and to work with them. And I can say now, I make hiring decisions, and I would much rather work with someone that I have built trust in, and I know that they are good and contributing, to help them find ways so that they can continue their career instead of feeling like they can't, rather than saying, okay, I'll thank you and I'll go find someone else and hire. There's cost of hiring, there's cost of training, and there's a risk of a new person versus working with someone that's already that you're already comfortable with. And I know a lot of you ask questions about, how do I ask for flexible hours or to work from home? And so I think it's important to realize that, if you're amazing, and you are, be amazing at your job, and you have power. You have power to to uh, to go and request these types of things, and I think you will be surprised and happy how the companies are willing to grant some flexibility in order to retain you. So I think it's important to learn that early. It took me kind of going through that experience to realize that. So I would encourage you to learn that and be bold and ask for the situations that you need that allow you to both, do your work and find the balance that you need at that time. The next slide I wanted to mention was being flexible. This is another really important concept that I've learned over time. There isn't just one way to balance. And children and events, they come one at a time. They aren't permanent. So my situation and my needs were always evolving. And so I had to make adjustments along the way. There were times when I worked from home. There were times when I worked part-time. As I mentioned, there were times when I didn't work at all. There were times when I could travel extensively and times when I couldn't travel at all. There were times when I could take on more outside activities and times when I had to say no. And I know in my experience with mentoring, particularly at BYU, some students are very concerned about how they're going to make this work. How do I do this when I'm married and I have children? Or how do I do this, if this happens? And I always try to remind them that, just live in the now a little bit and really think about what your needs are right now and not about the what if, because your circumstances will change. And so, I always kind of try to live by when it isn't working, make adjustments. Things can be fixed and changed, and try not to worry too much about the future, because the future, those circumstances are hard to predict what exactly they will be. So especially as women are considering business careers, that's what I hear a lot is, how can I have this kind of a career and be married with a family? And they're not married yet. They don't know the circumstances of what they're faced with. So just be patient and realize that that being flexible as your life evolves is the best way. And I've evolved my situation many, many times. The next topic is setting boundaries. I also call this my no regrets rule. There were a lot of questions around this, around how to set boundaries and how to manage that. And I didn't consciously at first set boundaries, but as I realized that I was going to continue to work and my children were small, I made some commitments to myself. And and I was struggling with should I even be working? Is this, the culture was such that there weren't a lot of women that I knew that were working, and so I was struggling with should I even be doing it? And so that's when I made some commitments that I said, I'm going to work as long as certain conditions work for me. But always bearing in mind that if certain things changed, these were boundaries that I would not cross, because I didn't want to have any regrets at the end of the day. Some of those for me were the health and well-being of my children. I knew that if the health and well-being of my children was compromised, or I didn't feel comfortable with how they were growing and maturing, that they would come first, and I wouldn't sacrifice that for the next promotion or continuing even to stay in the workforce if it came to that. I wanted to have a family, and I wanted to have as many children as I wanted to have. I didn't want to give that up. I thought at the end of the day, that's what matters most to me, and I want to have my family. And as each child came, I reassessed and made some changes so that I could make it work. But I had my full family. My marriage, I said I would never choose my career over ensuring that I was devoting what I needed to have a strong marriage. It was really important to have the support of my husband through all of these decisions. I didn't want my children and family basically to suffer because I wanted to do both. And so I was willing to do both as long as those conditions were met. One example of this was when my son, this is when I was living in Idaho and I was only working part-time. My oldest son was in kindergarten, and he would go to a daycare in the mornings. They would take him to kindergarten, and then I would pick him up. And it was great. It was a little social time for him, and I thought everything was wonderful, and it was. And then one day when I was home, he just said something that kind of struck me odd, you know, it made me, it was a little disturbing. It was about an older child in the daycare and you know, their interaction. And I thought, okay, that's not right. I don't feel good about that. So I started wondering and pondering about it. The next day I went to the daycare and I the lady and told her my concern, and she assured me everything was fine and that she'd watch and that there was nothing, you know, inappropriate. And I dropped him off and I was driving to work and it hit me. I had set a boundary and I was not keeping to my commitment. I was not comfortable with the health and well-being of my son at that point. I wasn't sure, but I thought, am I going to wait until I'm sure, or am I going to keep my commitment and adjust and make sure that that priority and that is first addressed? So I remember crying, kind of going through this in my mind and saying, what am I doing? And I turned my car around. I called my work and I said, I'm not going to be able to come in today. I went and I picked up my son. And I thanked the lady. I had no complaint. I had no evidence. I had nothing other than my own feeling. And I picked him up and took my time to find another situation where I felt comfortable with him staying before I went back to work. And as I look back on that, that was a test at that time for me. And I'm glad I had this experience because it helped me remember those boundaries and to be true to them. And I can honestly say, you know, as my children have grown and matured and looking how they have done that over time, I feel like I've been true to that. I have, you know, healthy, you know, great, responsible children. So that's just one thing, an example of how I set a boundary, and after you set them, you have to stay with them. Moving through to the next slide, I'd like to just touch on culture. This is something that I didn't really notice until I've been reflecting back over this journey of mine, how important company culture is, and also your leader culture, who you are actually working with in the company, and the support that they give you to make sure that you have time and can you know, have other interests and take time for your family. Sometimes the culture can be good, but it's just you have to also get comfortable with your work arrangement and that it might be a little bit different. So when I was working from home, when I was back at American Express, I had a great boss, and he helped me make that arrangement, put that in place for me. And he was supportive, and the culture was supportive, but I was still concerned. I still felt like perhaps others weren't supportive, my colleagues, some of the people that worked for me. And it took some time to gain my own comfort with that. And I'm grateful that it did, that I was able to do that. But another thing is I know friends and colleagues that have worked in other companies, and they may say that they have a great culture, but they don't help you feel that. They don't demonstrate that themselves. I know when I have a leader that is also balancing their home and family, it makes me more comfortable that it truly is the culture. And that's something that I try to do as a leader, and I try to do that for both men and women. I think that men need flexibility, even if they do or don't have a working spouse. And I try to also encourage them to find that right balance so that they're satisfied as well. So I think it's important to think about your and what kind of a culture it sets, and then how the people and the leaders actually support that culture. Because if you don't have that, I think it's very hard to find the balance. If you're fighting against your company culture, or you feel when you leave certain times during the day, or you leave early, or you have things that come up, if that's frowned upon, it's hard to find comfort in doing that. So that's an important thing to assess. The next one I would like to just touch on is what I call, don't miss the big stuff. There are sacrifices that you will make and that I've made, on both sides, both with work, sometimes with activities. I wasn't able to volunteer at school every week like some moms were able to. I wasn't able to attend every field trip that my child went on like some parents and mothers are able to do. But I remember my son, he was in elementary school and it was his birthday, and I said, what would you like for your birthday? And he said, I want you to come and have lunch with me at school. And I thought, okay, I was there. That was important, and I made sure that happened. And so even though I wasn't there all the time, I felt like the times that I was mattered, and that they mattered to my children. There was another child that did want me to come on field trips so badly, and I remember, that was difficult for me to do. I couldn't, they had 3 or 4 during the year, and so we sat down and said, okay, let's pick one. Which one is the most special one? And letting her choose the one that mattered the most to her. And then I made sure I attended that one. I mean, and so sometimes you have to give up certain things, but you can make what you do and what you are able to do even more special. I have a few other stories on this topic, but the one I'll share with you now is when my oldest daughter was a senior in high school. She was having a year-end showcase. She was on the dance team, and I had to go to San Francisco and meet with the regulators, me along with many of the other executives from New York, the vice chairman, my boss, people from our legal council were going to be there, and I represented the bank. I was the bank president, and I just felt like I had no choice. I had to be there. It was not one of those things where I could ask to be excused. I didn't feel. Other times, I've been bold and have said I can't be there, but this was when I didn't feel I had that. And so what I did is I reassured my daughter that I would be back, because her event was in the evening, and I figured, okay, I can have my meeting. If I leave immediately after it's over, I can take a car, get to the airport, go through the express line, make this flight, get there, land, get home, run there, and I'd make it. Everything had to fall in line, but I had a plan, and I was going to give it my all. And I remember my daughter understanding, but I could see the look in her eye that was, I hope you're there. and it was difficult. But what I learned is that when I went to my meeting, and I told my colleague that I had this plan on how I was going to leave the minute it was over, and I was going to get home, and she mentioned it to my boss. And the next morning, the morning of the meeting and the event, we had a prep meeting. We all got together for breakfast, and he came over and he said, I understand you have something really important tonight. And I said, yes, I do. I think I can make it. And he said, you need to just go. And I remember just kind of my eyes kind of flooding with tears, trying to hold that back. And I remember feeling like, does he really mean that? Because I wanted to do that so desperately, but I just didn't feel like I was in a position. And he said, we will be fine. He said, send a note to the people we were going to meet with. Let them know you've had something come up. We will cover for you, and you need to go. And so I went. I took an early flight. I got home, plenty of time. In fact, I remember showing up at the high school hours early and walking in to help with the setup, which I, of course, didn't think I would be there at all to do. And my daughter's face just lighting up. And I just want to reinforce how important the big stuff is. and not to miss those. At the end of the day, did anyone care if I was at that meeting or not? No. Did that meeting go on with or without me? Yes. Is my daughter going to always remember that I was there and I was able to attend her year-end showcase? Yes. And that's what matters. And I have several stories like that. And again, that also talks to my company culture, right? That I was in a company that was willing to help me. It wasn't just me trying to balance, but I had those around me that also knew how important that was and supported me in doing it. And I think that's extremely important. I've been able to ask my children, now that they're grown, a little bit more about their feelings and their experiences, and if I was there and how they felt. And they pretty much said, you know, Mom, you weren't always there as much as my friends' moms, but I knew you would never miss the really important things. They knew that I was there. And to me, that's having it all. I did sacrifice some things, but I did the things that mattered and that really built the relationships with me and my children. The next slide is a little bit of what I've described about having a support network. Carpools are my best friend, and they should be your best friend. You just can't be everywhere. And so, you know, setting up carpools, having friends, neighbors, decide on your spouse's role. You know, what can he do and how much? And extended family, that's so important. Use them. Don't be afraid to ask them. They love your children too, and that's one thing I've learned having my mother live with us is the long, you know, healthy, sustaining relationship my children have learned to have with her by her being in the home and also being a caregiver. And my husband has been able to have, you know, more time with the children because of my work situation. He had a more flexible work schedule, and he made sure that, you know, that was something so it wasn't as demanding as mine, and that let him be their baseball coach. That let him attend, you know, events sometimes during the day when I couldn't get away, because he could. And I think it's important to realize that it all doesn't have to fall on you. There's other people that you can rely on that are just are great, and it's good for your children as well. I'm going to go to the next slide, which I call Be Bold. And this means have some courage. Sometimes I had to be bold. I had to speak up for myself, even when I felt it might mean that I couldn't work there anymore. One time when I was in public accounting, so again, this was very early in my career, I had been working on one job, and this job allowed me to stay in town during busy season. It didn't have really extensive hours. It was one of the best jobs in the office, to be honest. And when the next year rolled around and I figured, oh, I'll be on that job again, they had moved me to another job, and that job had all kinds of problems the year before. It had overrun its budget. People had worked, you know, round the clock. It was just, and I was devastated. I thought, I don't know that I can commit to that. I had just had one child, and I needed to, you know, be able to count on my schedule. And so I remember, you know, thinking, this might be when I exit. This might not work for me anymore. And I thought about it, and I went in, and I remember speaking with the partner and just telling him, you know, I had hoped that I would be able to, you know, have another year on this job, and it looks as if this is not going to happen. And so, you know, I'm here to let you know that I'm not going to be able to do that, and thoroughly expecting that I was giving my notice. And he was shocked. He was like, I had no idea, you know, that one, you'd been moved off that job, and two, that you know, you needed this type of a job you know, and that you have a small child, and my husband was in school, and he just very easily made an adjustment. And again, it wouldn't have happened had I not spoke to him. If I would have just, you know, left without sharing the concern or the problem and giving someone an opportunity to help me, that would have probably been the end right then, because I knew I couldn't do that. So sometimes it takes courage, and you have to be prepared for the worst thing that could happen, which, you know, in this case it was, you know, I mean, I have a job, but I was sticking to the boundaries that I had set, and that was the way I proceeded, and I was very pleasantly surprised that there was a way to still make it work. And so I think the theme for me through all of this is that there have been ways to make things work at each juncture in my career, when I had different needs, different challenges between my husband, my family, the company, and the leaders that I had. There were solutions that could be found that eased some of the burden or the way I was feeling. Didn't always take it completely away, but it eased it such that I felt like I could manage it and continue on, and I'm so grateful for that. My last slide is really just kind of a summation, and then I'll talk about a few other things, but it's really about, you have to be happy. You have to enjoy, you know, all aspects and trying to make it work. If you get to a place where I was at one time, when I'm so overwhelmed and I was miserable and feeling defeated, you know, then it's not worth it. But if you can make it work, if you can make adjustments, there will be ups and there will be downs, I promise, and I've had them. But it can also be worth it. I've loved raising my 5 children. I have wonderful relationships with each of them. I've been lucky to have a fulfilling career and opportunities in my career, and those opportunities have benefited not just me, but they've benefited my whole family. But you have to enjoy the journey of finding that balance. There have been sacrifices on all fronts, both at work and at home and personally, but at the end of the day, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed my journey, and would encourage other women to find their way and to find the path that works for them, because I believe it can be done. Those were really my tips and the remarks that I had, you know, prepared, and then I had a few other things as I read your comments. You know, as I was trying to put those into themes and think about what else I might be able to offer you from my experience. And I've got a few things here I'm just calling practical advice, a few stories and a few things that have really helped make a difference for me, and I want to share. First one's a little story, and again, I had a boss from New York, and one time he opened the meeting, we were in a small group meeting, and he said, Andrea, I know how you do it. I know how she does it. And I had no idea what he was talking about. Like, what's he talking? And at the time, I had a son in high school, and I did not want to miss his wrestling matches. Some of them started, you know, right after school, so, you know, it would require me to leave early. And my boss had a son who was playing hockey in college, and he would always talk about, I want to get to my son's hockey game, and he was always struggling to do that. And over time, he noticed that I would put on my calendar, block those times out. When I needed to leave, I would block that on my calendar. My calendar was an open book, and if people needed to schedule a meeting or they needed time, if my calendar was open, they could take the time. So rather than just hoping I could sneak away and that hopefully it would work and nobody would book that time and I could leave early, I would put it right on my calendar. And I think he finally realized that my calendar had some things that were blocked off for personal time. And he loved it. In fact, he said, that's genius. And he's like, I'm going to do the same thing. And I think sometimes we're afraid, again, it's a little bit about being bold and saying this is important, and I'm blocking the time, and it comes first, and having other people arrange and move their schedules to accommodate. It's easier to always say yes. It's always, oh, sure, I can come then, and not saying, no, that time's not going to work for me. So that's a piece of practical advice. Block your calendars and make sure you're thinking ahead of the things that, again, really matter most to you. Another important thing for me was to get help in the house. My mother-in-law told me this. I was, trying to do the housework, trying to keep it up, trying to, do all the things that came along with that, and work and raise children. And I think she was the first one to say, you have got to get someone to clean your house. And at that time, that wasn't as common. And I was like, oh, I can't do it myself, a sign of weakness. And it was the best thing I ever did. So, after I had come home from a long day, or when I had weekends with my family, the last thing I wanted to do was to clean my house. That was not the fun part of being a mother for me. I don't enjoy that. I wanted to go with my family on their activities. I wanted to go on outings. I wanted to be the fun mom. I didn't want to come home and feel the drudgery of all of the other burdens that come. And so we had house cleaners. We have home delivery for milk and some food items. There's certain services that may feel like perks, or they may feel like extravagances, but don't look at them that way, because I think when you're trying to do so many things, and you are making money, that's one of the reasons you're out there in the workforce. You need to use it. You need to let that help you, and not feel like everything falls on you and you can't take advantage of some of those services. That made a big difference for me. I didn't like cleaning my house, and it made it so that I didn't feel like I had to or needed to, because I knew it would be getting done on a regular basis. So that was a really important one for me. I had a lot of you ask questions around how do you find time for your family and personal, and as I read your comments, there's a lot of compartmentalizing. And as I thought about my own experiences, I think one of the things I would offer you to think about is to not compartmentalize your time so much. Don't think about, I'm at work and I'm only at work. Now I'm home, I'm only at home, and now I'm going to have some personal time, so I've got to carve that out just for me. I blend everything I can, because time is time, and I want to make the most of all my time. So, for example, if during a period when I was traveling for work, I would turn that into a family vacation. So I would go early, I would do my work, and then my family would meet me. And we had trips to New York, had a trip one time to the Cayman Islands because I had to go there for a business trip. I did that many times, and sometimes it was my family, and sometimes I would just take one child with me, and take a friend and their friend, their child, which was my friend to my child. And I would work, they would play during the day, I would catch up with them in the evenings, have dinner, go to a show, and those are some of their greatest memories. And I was working and spending time with my family. I didn't feel like I was being, removed from my family. Instead, I tried to blend those two so that it was more enjoyable. And it was time spent with them. Another example, if I wanted personal time, to go to the gym, or I hardly ever get a pedicure without taking one of my daughters, because it's something personal that's fun to do, but it's not that important that I do it on my own personal time. I do it when I'm spending time with my child, and we do it together. And now I'm spending time with her and getting something done that I'd like to do. I meet my husband for lunch during the day. I mean, when we had, all of our 5 children at home, when we would get home, we didn't have time to talk. We didn't have time. We were running children around. We were doing dinner. We were exhausted. And so he was working, I was working, and we would meet for lunch. And that is where I spent my time really being able to talk to him. And I look back on that, and that was a great way to use time out of my day to make time for personal as well. And I take care of, and vice versa. when I'm at business, at work, I do some administrative things that might need to be done. I figure, I'm taking calls sometimes on Saturday, sometimes I'm taking calls late into the night. Why can't I use some of my time during the day to make my doctor appointments, schedule those carpools, take care, follow up with a teacher. I don't feel guilty about mixing and blending my time, both personal and business, in order to just be more efficient and use my time. So that's another thing that I do. I remember one time taking a business call that was important. I needed to be on, but it was right in the middle of my son's baseball game. So I went to my son's baseball game. I walked out to right field so I could have, hopefully you wouldn't hear all the cheering and the yelling, and I took my call. But while I took my call, I was watching the game. I got to see him up at bat. Afterwards, I could talk to him about how he did, and I got my call done. And no one cared that I was standing out in right field by myself on a cell phone. I was doing both. And so I think it's, remembering that all your time is precious and it doesn't have to be compartmentalized. I remember running my son from football practice to wrestling practice, so all of this running around that would sometimes happen in the evening. And on the way, we would do spelling words. I'd take the spelling list and pick him up, and while he's changing clothes to get ready for the next thing, he's reciting his words to me. And so you just find ways to be efficient. We all have the same amount of hours in a day, but I think we can be very creative in how we make the very most of that time with everything that we have on our plate. One more tip that really worked for me, and there was a question about this too, and that is, I would encourage you to spend alone time with your child, just like you spend alone time with your husband, and alone time for yourself. Sometimes you come home and it's chaos. You're getting dinner and there's homework and so many things to be done. But if you can find some quiet time and really let your children have a chance to speak with you where they don't feel rushed and hurried, and let them talk to you. I always found at nighttime was the best. I would just crawl. We would say prayers, and they would go to their beds, and then pretty soon I'd just kind of go up to one of the bedrooms and crawl into bed with them, and then they're not distracted and I'm not distracted, and we would just talk. We would just spend some time there, not a long time, but enough to just let them really talk to me about what's going on and what their day was. And it didn't take long, but it was just alone time, and I think that really strengthened our relationships over the years. I'm continuing to go. I have a few more minutes. I've covered a lot. I hope it's been helpful. One other kind of theme that I saw in the questions was, some of you have asked, how do you deal with guilt? Do you have guilt? Do you feel guilty about trying to have it all, or to be out of the home? And I think that's natural. I think there were times for sure that I felt that way. But one of the things that I found helpful is to not dwell on the things that you aren't doing perfect, or the way you'd like them to be done because you work. But think of the benefits your family is receiving because you do work. So kind of flip that on its head. It's not like what is lacking, what you aren't able to do, but what you are able to do. I think as my children have gotten older, they've been able to be very appreciative of the benefits of me working. They've learned responsibility and independence at an early age. I wasn't able to be the helicopter mom and rescue them every time they forgot their assignment, or they needed this, or they weren't prepared for that. They had to take some of those consequences, but it made them better. It made them learn to think, independently. They have opportunities and extracurricular activities that not everyone gets because I was working and we could afford extra things. And now those things really enrich their lives and their talents and their opportunities. And they can see that now. They're all getting a college education because that was something that we planned for and were able to provide because I did work, and we had the ability to do that for them. And they see some of their friends and some of their acquaintances that aren't so lucky and don't have some of those same opportunities. And so there's a lot of benefits that I think you can also see that at least for me, helped me feel, and not dwell on feeling guilty. There were things that I sacrificed for sure. And I was just thinking about what a few of those might be. I think last on my list of my priorities was probably my personal friends. I have very few, close personal friends. They're just my friends. My friends are my family. They're people I go to work with. They're people I go to church with. They're people that are in my life. And it's very difficult to find time to nurture other personal close friends. And those that I do are very low maintenance. And that's a wonderful thing, which means we don't require to connect often, but when we do, it's awesome. We can catch up quickly. But, that takes a lot of energy and time. And that's one of the things that I decided, wasn't as important to me. So there's lots of things that we do sacrifice that if we had more time in our lives, we would fill that time for sure with other things. But my kind of final advice would be just to set those priorities and those boundaries and find joy in trying to find the path that works for you. It can be very fulfilling. I feel very blessed to have been able to manage it with a lot of help, with a lot of help from others and a lot of support. But for me, it's been worth it. I have a lot of satisfaction in my personal life as well as in my professional life, and I'm grateful for that. So we have about 8 minutes left, but I didn't want to run over, so that's pretty much what I'm going to cover, and I would just ask Rixa if there's anything else that's come up or anything that you'd like me to cover from any of the questions that may have come during the presentation.
Well, I'm just going to look at a couple of the questions that were sent in, and one of them said, what's your biggest regret? And another one said, being in a Mormon congregation where most women don't work or seek a career, how have you dealt with some of the cultural critical comments or cultural comments that come with that? And I think that's a valid thing. And then the final one was, what about health, eating well and exercising and things like that?
Those are all really great topics. Health, I'll just kind of start backwards and work back up. Health for me has been something that certain times I've been able to devote more to being fit and getting my exercise. And other times, I have not paid as much attention to it. So I think it's like I was saying that you have to find the balance at each stage in your life, and sometimes you can put more emphasis, and I'm not saying it shouldn't always be an emphasis, but there's been times when it's been less of an emphasis because other things have been more important. I'm in a place now where I can kind of spend more time on that, and I love that. So I think it's just one of the very important things that you have to consider in the mix of where you prioritize, the time that you have. There's also things that I do, like I take the stairs. When I'm in our corporate office, it's only 4 floors, but those are 4 pretty good sets of stairs. And so, again, you find ways to incorporate it, and don't think help only means I have to find an hour and a half where I can go to the gym or I'm not getting my exercise in. You can park your car a little further, take an extra walk, take a walk during the lunch hour. I mean, there's ways that you can still prioritize your health. You can be on a phone call and walk. A lot of offices now, have standing desks. Again, the culture of the company and things that they can do to help you, be more healthy. So again, it's finding a solution that you can work in, because it's another really important thing that you need to do to take care of yourself. I can say I sleep well at night. It's never been a problem for me. When you have a full, busy day, I hit the pillow and I'm gone, and I'm grateful for that. But whatever your health challenges are, I just think you have to work them in just like the other topics. On the church topic, sometimes there's, and I think it was more early in my career than what I experience now. So maybe that really is, but I feel that there's a lot of women in the church that work, and maybe they don't have big careers, but they work. They do something outside of the home. Whether it's part-time, whether it's in the school, we all fill our time, and it's not just devoted to being home and being a mother. There's other things that come into all of women's lives, and so I feel that that it's less criticized. I don't feel that as much anymore. I have a lot of women in my ward say, "I don't know how you do it all. I don't know how you find it." And I always wonder, is that a compliment, or are they feeling sorry for me, or are they criticizing me? I don't know what they mean by that. But I always respond by just saying, we all have busy lives, regardless if you're working out of the home or not, and things that take our time demand. One thing, though, with the church, because I always felt a little bit bad because I couldn't serve in what I thought was a larger way. I haven't been the legislative president. I haven't been the primary president. I've been in some counselors in some of those. I was for a very short period, over the young women. But basically, my callings have been teaching, have been, other types of callings that I have over time very comfortable with and very grateful for. And so I think we have to ourselves realize when we have a lot of demands. For me, my priorities were family, work, myself, and then service. And service in the church and the community. Church doesn't mean church was my last priority as far as my own individual testimony and my own faith. But in service, I didn't have to take on a large calling that would make my weekends and my Sunday just as kind of crazy as some of my other days. I've really come to appreciate the fact that I can attend Relief Society, and that becomes part of the me time, my personal time, where I can soak in these great lessons and I can regenerate. And so looking at, your what you're saying yes to and what you're taking on in the church, it's not necessary from an eternal perspective. It's just necessary that you serve, and there's all kinds of ways to serve. Being a great visiting teacher is a great way to serve, and I think we have to get comfortable with that. So I don't know if that's helpful, but something that I had to kind of wrap my head around. What was my biggest regret? I shared a lot about how to try to avoid having regrets, right? And so I don't think I have any big regret. I have maybe there was a time when I had to realize that if I couldn't be everywhere that I wanted to be, I was missing out, and I felt like I had some regret. But my children weren't missing out. My husband was there. My mother was there. Somebody was there, and my children were well cared for and loved, but it didn't always come from me. And so, I look back and I think I missed some things, but the children don't look back and say that anything was missed, because they had people around them that loved them and cared for them, and they were happy and healthy. So that's a hard question. I'll have to think about that a little bit more, but I think the whole point of balancing is really trying to avoid having any regrets that are really of importance. So, Rixa, I think we're pretty much on the time.
We are, but thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear how other people make those decisions and set priorities and what they do, because it helps us evaluate our own experience. And I really think that you've hit on many of the questions that our audience had, both during and before the presentation. So thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you to all the audience. Know that you'll be sent a short survey as you immediately as you conclude. And we have recorded this, and it will be posted on the BYU Management Society website. So I'll send you instructions and a link to that. Again, thank you, Andrea. Thank you for our audience, and hope you'll all continue to be engaged with each other and continue this discussion with others who can help you as you have your challenges. And watch for announcements on our future webinars. Again, have a great day. Thank you.